Welcome back to the Health Builders community. We're on a journey to show you how to get well and stay well using our unique healing approach. I've spoken to you a bit about foods that harm and foods that heal. So let me give you a quick recap and then we will move on to the next step. This is all very simple. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure it all out. You just need to do it. Knowing how to do it and knowing what to do is a big part of the process. You'll probably appreciate that if you don't have a way of checking whether a food is good or bad for you, most of this information is irrelevant. But because you do have a way of testing and checking and seeing what you can use and can't use using energy kinesiology, it becomes a game changer in terms of switching on your body to heal. We've said that plant-based foods are the healing foods. These are the foods your body loves them best when it comes to healing. They include vegetables and fruits, as well as cereals such as wheat and barley and oats and rye. They also include maize and rice, nuts and seeds, and even dried fruits. All those are plant-based foods. I've explained the significance of organic versus non-organic, or organic versus commercial. Organic food is grown in a way that fills it with nutrients and all sorts of nutritional elements that your body needs in order to function. Commercial food, on the other hand, is often grown in land that is nutritionally deficient because the soil itself is deficient in minerals and trace elements because it's been mined, so to speak. So if it's not in the land, it can't be in your food, and if it's not in your food, obviously then it's not going to be of any benefit to you and it's not in your body. So it's very important to understand that if there are nutritional deficiencies in food, which there are, then you may have to find some other way of putting those nutrients into your body. And that's where food supplementation comes in. And we'll be talking about that later. We've spoken about the components of food. I mentioned bread and the gluten story and also rice. Rice is a little bit similar in its story to brown bread and white bread. White rice is heavily processed. Much of the goodness and many of the nutrients have been taken out. There is goodness in the hull, and when that is removed, what is left is very unbalanced food. We know it as white rice. It also doesn't contain fiber, which your body needs to help cleanse the colon. We discussed that. Brown rice is obviously a better option than white rice, and better still is organic brown rice, if you can get it, and you can. The other side of the coin is that rice is not one of those products that has generally been subject to genetic modification through GMO. GMO stands for genetically modified organism, where the food is altered in a very destructive and unnatural way. There's a big difference between traditional plant breeding and genetically modified food, GMO. Eating GMO food is a game changer when it comes to your health. So if you're in America and you're eating maize or corn, as it's called there, that has probably been genetically modified, you need to be very careful. You need to make sure that the maize you're eating and the food you're getting is organic and has not been affected by GMO, because these foods are very, very destructive and they cannot promote health. It's impossible to eat that stuff and stay well and healthy in the long term. It just isn't going to happen. You're going to end up sick. Cattle, who are offered two different types of food, one GMO and one not, will instinctively take the non-GMO food every time. They don't eat the other one, the GMO, unless they absolutely have to. So there is a lot of negative stuff going on with GMO. Canola oil is another GMO crop, and it gets into food as well. Fortunately, in Europe, we don't have the same issue to quite as big an extent with GMO, because Europe has decided it isn't a good idea, and they've very wisely banned the use of GMO seed. That doesn't mean it isn't in the food, but it's not at least being grown. But we do have a problem with Roundup. Roundup is sprayed everywhere, and it's very destructive, not only for the environment, but also for your internal environment, because it affects the bacteria in the soil and the bacteria in your gut in a very negative way. And as you'll see later on this journey, a healthy gut is a critical component of your health. I said earlier that perhaps 70% of your problems would instantly disappear if I had a magic wand and could simply heal your gut. It's that significant. And that's why we're spending some time talking about food. We've talked about plant-based foods. We've also talked about meat and fish and chicken and eggs. And generally speaking, eggs are a very good food. They're a healing food. There's not too much wrong with eggs. There was a time when people said, oh, if you eat eggs or too many eggs, you'll have a problem with cholesterol. Well, that's simply not true. Eggs have natural lecithin in them, which deals with that anyway. So eggs are generally a good food. Again, test them with your energy kinesiology. But there is a man-made issue with eggs, which is quite interesting. You may not believe this, but people who've had a lot of vaccinations often react to eggs, because egg albumin is sometimes used in vaccines. This is crazy. The way it is meant to be is when you eat an egg, it gets broken down in your gut into its tiniest, smallest pieces. You're not meant to have egg albumin in your bloodstream. That's the protein that's found in eggs. It's meant to come in as amino acids. That's how the proteins are meant to enter your body. And these are the building blocks of protein. So if you've had vaccinations, you might be one of those people who reacts quite strongly to eggs. Again, you can check this very quickly and very easily using energy kinesiology. And if you get a strong reaction to any of these things, and you are unfortunate enough to be reacting, you just have to not eat them. So just be aware of eggs. And if you're not sure, test them, test everything with energy kinesiology. I'd be testing everything simply because it takes no time at all. And it's well worth the effort. After all, why would you eat something that's going to harm you? We're going to move on and talk next about milk. Milk is a common food in our diet, and there are a couple of issues you need to think about and understand when it comes to milk. The first is that because of the way milk is produced in a fairly intensive environment, cows are often receiving antibiotics when they get mastitis. Obviously, the farmers try to isolate this, but it does get into the milk. Those antibiotics, having found their way into the milk, will find their way into your digestive system, into your gut. And that's not the right thing for you. You want to keep antibiotics out of your gut. Antibiotic means it's going to kill organisms and it's going to kill bacteria. And you have trillions of them in your gut. And if you kill the good ones along with the bad ones, you leave yourself open to all sorts of problems for your immune system. So while antibiotics have their place in emergencies and they're great in emergency medicine, they are not great if you use them too frequently. They will cause all sorts of health challenges. So what's the big deal with milk? As part of the method for preparing milk and milk products, milk is pasteurised. This is to help prevent or to kill bugs that might be in that they could cause you harm. When you pasteurize milk, you heat it to over 80 degrees, and when you do that, you denature the protein, meaning you change the structure of the protein. in the world of food digestion, the body produces substances called enzymes. These are large protein structures that go in and break down your food. In biochemistry, structure and function are closely linked. Imagine a piece of milk protein has a particular shape, say it's like this, and your enzyme has a matching shape like this. They come together like this, the milk protein and the enzyme breaks it apart and everything works fine. But when you heat the milk, the protein changes its shape. That's what we mean by denaturing. Now the protein might look like this, and the enzyme comes in to try and work with it, but the structure is changed and it can't break the milk down. That's why people have problems with milk. You basically can't break the protein down with your enzymes or with your digestive system, but there are bacteria and other organisms in your digestive system that can break it down. And when they break it down into toxic substances which get into your bloodstream and cause all sorts of reactions. This is what's going on. The process of digestion is really quite remarkable. You eat a large lump of meat, say, which has hundreds of thousands of individual components all stuck together. You chew it and you break it down into chunks that maybe have 50,000 components broken, all junked together. In your stomach, it breaks down to maybe 25,000 size chunks. And then it goes down through your digestive system and it breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, into thousands and hundreds and tens, and eventually it ends up as a single molecule called an amino acid. These amino acids are meant to cross from your digestive system into the bloodstream. They're taken into the liver, and the liver uses them to rebuild all the proteins that you need throughout the body. It's absolutely astounding. We have no idea what's going on inside your body. It's amazing. But of course, it's all happening, dare we say, automatically, but of course there's a life force energy that's making it happen, which we take for granted. The point I'm making is that enzymes break food down into smaller and smaller pieces. And as you'll see later, when we get into the next section, failure to break food down properly is a huge issue when it comes to food sensitivities, leaky gut, and digestive problems. And one of the things there is having the wrong or the unhealthy bacteria instead of the healthy ones. That's a big issue too. We'll talk about that later. And you'll understand how you can fix that relatively easily. But right now, what I'm saying is that the food you eat gets broken down into very small components. And all food either becomes energy for you to use to burn up, or to contributes to energy so that you have energy in your body. Ultimately, energy ends up as one molecule in the body, and that's called glucose, one molecule. So even that huge piece of bread that you ate, which had hundreds of thousands of strands of glucose together, ends up, whether it's wholemeal bread or white bread, it will end up being broken down into tens of thousands and then hundreds and then single individual glucose units. And these units are the key. The glucose molecule is the key energy molecule. And breaking things down, of course, happens as you chew your food and as it passes through your digestive system. It eventually ends up in a form that the body uses, as I've said, which is glucose, which enters the bloodstream and is usually, it's always used as energy throughout the body. The point is that everything has to be broken down by enzymes. Now, enzymes are made in your body, and they are highly complex protein molecules made out of many, many, many components. And if you don't have the components you need to make them, your body won't be able to produce them. It's a bit like having a beautiful car. And the car is there sitting in the driveway ready to go. It's all good, but somebody forgot to put a tiny screw into the bottom of the carburetor. guess what? The car won't go. It won't start. It's the same in the human body. You need all the components to get the body to work properly. If you're missing minerals or trace elements or even small amounts of particular substances, your body stops functioning as it should, and that leads to health challenges. That's not all about food, but a lot of it is. And that's why nutrition is so important. When you're eating foods that are nutritionally deficient, it gets in the way of your healing. Very often, the issue in getting well and staying well is simply that you haven't given your body everything it needs in order to heal itself. Now, I'm not only talking about the physical level. Of course, as I've already alluded to, there are also the mental and emotional components of all these different aspects of your health, and are equally or perhaps even more significant. But we'll be dealing with them later on in the journey as we continue on our journey to teach you how to get well and stay well, because you can confidently determine what these emotions are, and you can identify them, and you can clear them as well. It's part of what I'm going to show you and part of what I'm going to teach you, and this is foundational. The food you're eating is important. You need to be aware of what I'm saying. Take a dairy product like yogurt. Interesting, isn't it? Yogurt is a food that you can usually digest and eat, and some people who can't handle milk and cheese can handle yogurt. Now, why would that be? Because the bacteria in the yogurt have broken it down into much smaller components that your digestive system can digest. So instead of having these big molecules as you do in milk, the bacteria have done the job of breaking these molecules down into tinier pieces. And this is what we would call the friendly bacteria. You've probably heard of them. The friendly bacteria are the bacteria, lactobacillus and many others, that live in yogurt. And the tiny pieces that they've broken the milk down into are now much more digestible for you. Very often, as I've said, you'll find that yogurt may work, whereas cheese won't. Because cheese is the most toxic of all the dairy products. Why? Because cheese is the concentrated protein. The protein in the cheese is the part that's causing the problem. Butter is actually the fat. So fat isn't the problem. The protein is the problem. That means that people can often have butter with no problem when they can't eat cheese because it makes them feel sick. And that's the reason. The components of the food that are causing the problem are in the cheese, but they're not in the butter. Very often we'll check with kinesiology for butter, and people will say, well, you know, I can't eat dairy products. But when you check the body says, yeah, that's fine. And the reason is because you're testing the butter, and the butter has the fat, and the fat is not what's causing the problem. That's just the way it is. When you test milk, it may well say, no, there's a problem here, because the milk, of course, has the protein. And that's the reasoning. This is about helping you to understand why these things happen. It's not always black and white, but very often it's common sense. Here's another thing that's really helpful. The journey of getting well and staying well is a journey, and it's a journey of reducing the number of sensitivities that you have. So as you get more healthy, or get, should I say, weller, you're basically going to find your food sensitivities start to decline. This is as you start healing the gut and changing your diet and moving in the direction of getting better and feeling better, those sensitivities start to decline and diminish. It's very interesting because food sensitivities are also connected to the emotional field, as you'll see later. And so we've talked about the different components of food, and we've talked about dairy and why it's often a problem and how that problem may manifest. We've looked at the idea that you may get mucus in your lungs and sinus problems and other things, particularly if you're sensitive to dairy products and other foods. Very often, dairy-related issues will manifest in many ways to do with the chest, the lungs, and the nose and the sinuses and stuff like that. So let's say you have a sensitivity to dairy. You can't digest the protein. The bacteria go in, they do their thing, they produce the toxins. Those toxins end up in the bloodstream. They go to the liver. The liver says, I'm overwhelmed, so it throws them back into the blood, and then they end up in your sinuses and in your lungs, and you have lung infections or sinus problems. That's the way it works. Now, I had that problem myself. For 20 years I was always sick. I had sinusitis and bronchitis and a terrible lethargy and back problems and migraine. And it turned out, and I didn't know at the time because this is 50 years ago and there was no kinesiology then, when we discovered it, that I had a severe sensitivity to dairy products. I was so sensitive to dairy products that I could put my finger on a block of cheese and I could put it on my tongue and I could have a blinding migraine in 5 minutes. That's how sensitive some people can be. So it's a scale. Some people are not that sensitive and some people are just a little sensitive, but whatever it is, if you're sensitive at all, it's going to challenge your health. So that's how it works with the protein in the milk. It's pretty important that you understand that, because at least you know what's going on, and the toxins that are produced by the bacteria in your gut can cause you lots of problem, and of course they'll cause indigestion as well. And that's the story with dairy and how it can cause a problem. Now, on the positive side, you have alternatives to dairy milk. You've got soya milk and almond milk and hazelnut milk and coconut milk and oat milk and linseed milk, and there's a load of them. And they're all useful substitutes. You simply check to see with your kinesiology which ones are okay for you, and then it becomes a matter of taste. There are plenty of ways to avoid dairy products, and if you have a problem, especially in Ireland, you just have to make the decision and do something. You see, in Ireland, because we're such a big dairy producing country, there's a strong emphasis on using dairy products. But for probably a significant part of the population, they are actually toxic. So if you want to get well, you may need to avoid them. It's as simple as that. If you like the idea of having an ice cream, go for a vegan ice cream. Remember, vegan means no dairy. So if you have a vegan ice cream, it will be made from something, but it won't be dairy. And if it's a chocolate vegan ice cream, it won't have dairy milk chocolate in it either. So vegan will always be non-dairy. That's a very useful thing to look for, and there's a lot of vegan foods being made available now. And there's also non-dairy ice creams from different companies made from different ingredients, which you can just buy straight. Of course, they're high in sugar, which is another day's work. I'm not saying that they're good for you because the sugar is very high, but they are at least non-dairy, and if dairy is your issue, you have an alternative. That gives you a general picture. Now, obviously, we haven't talked about alcohol. Alcohol is another thing you can check. Some people have a problem with it. Some people don't. Beer often causes a problem, and that's because of yeast. As we'll see later, when we talk about the gut, yeast can be very reactive. You've probably heard of Candida. Candida, it's associated with thrush. Candida is a kind of budding yeast, and it can cause problems. So sometimes with beer or Guinness and similar drinks, you can have a problem. Sometimes people have a problem with spirits. You simply test using your energy kinesiology and see. Tea and coffee, just the same. Check those as well. Coffee is an interesting one because quite a lot of people react to coffee. Caffeine in itself is not necessarily a bad food, but too much of it can be because it is a strong stimulant. Think of dairy milk chocolate. There are three things going on there. There's the milk, if you have an issue with dairy. There's the sugar, which can be overpowering for the body quite easily, and there's the caffeine from the chocolate. So chocolate can be a very powerful food if it's good for you, and it can be quite a destructive food if it's not, particularly the dairy milk varieties, because of the dairy issues that I've already explained. The darker chocolates, which are non-dairy, can often be better because cacao as a substance is extremely high in antioxidants, which are the substances you get in nature and creation that help your body to fight inflammation and other things that are going on. So what are we saying? We're saying basically that you need to check what you're eating. It's very simple. There's a free training course online that shows you the basic method for doing this yourself in a supermarket or in the comfort of your own home. Then there's a training course that teaches you basic muscle monitoring, which is very simple and very powerful, and anybody can do it. And if you're going to go on this journey with me, you're really going to need this as a foundation because it will change your life. There are 3 parts to the training: part 1, part 2, and part 3. Initially, you only need part 1 to do this. You need the muscle monitoring part of the training. As we go further on the journey and you can see the different issues that are popping up and how you can fix them, you can complete parts 2 and 3. That's available, and they're very helpful, and they're all on the website, which you'll be able to link into when you click the links in the description of this video. But start with part 1 on that training and just get comfortable with that. Do the training in energy kinesiology for muscle monitoring. It really is a game changer. But start with the free course. There's no cost in that, and it's amazing. When you've done it, you'll be blown away when you can see what you can do in seconds in terms of determining what causes your health challenges and what doesn't when it comes to food. And you'll find it is an absolute game changer to be able to do this energy kinesiology for loads of different aspects of health, not just food. So now we have a big picture. We have a big picture view of the foods that are helpful and the foods that might not be. So let me give you a quick recap so you know where we're going. We're saying plant-based foods are best. That doesn't mean that you have to eat only plant-based foods, but they are best. Juicing them, for instance, is another very powerful thing that you can do. You can get a juicer and you can juice up all these different foods, and then you drink the juice, and that can be even more powerful because they're pre-digested. The juicer has digested them by mashing them up. There's a lot you can do depending on where your gut is at, and we'll talk about this later. So plant-based foods are best. They provide fiber, they provide nutrients, especially if they're organic. We've talked about beef and lamb, which are probably okay for most people, but pig meats and chicken are more likely to cause problems. Fish, well, you'll have to check individually for yourself, and it's usually not too bad. Although, of course, fish is swimming in a toxic ocean, so it can be picking up all sorts of things, particularly depending on where it's caught. Simple as that, really. But you test and you see and you read your labels. We said eggs are usually okay, although you may react to them a bit if you have an issue or have had an issue with vaccines, just the way it is. We also said that dairy products are often toxic or reactive, and you need to test them and substitute alternatives. If you find you have a problem, simply stop using them. Now, this may or may not be forever, because quite a lot of food sensitivities, as I've already said, will tend to clear as you heal your gut. But it will certainly be for a while until you get well. It's possible to overcome many of these food sensitivities, but initially you do not want to be adding fuel to the fire by putting more toxins into your body. And it really is a game changer when you stop doing this. When you change your eating pattern and remove the harmful foods, it can be dramatic. you can literally feel different in as little as 5 days. So stop using any of the foods that are coming up as negative. Cut them out for at least a while. Notice your health improving, and you will. And later on, you can always reintroduce them if you want to, and you can always test to see when you're ready to do that. We've said that rice is generally non-reactive. Bread can be, but if you're going to eat bread, make sure that you find the wholemeal alternative. Stone ground wholemeal is ideal, but wholemeal is the key. One small thing I didn't say about bread. Brown bread is not the same as wholemeal bread. It's a strange thing, but often they take a brown coloring dye and they add it to white flour to make brown bread. I don't know if you can believe that, but that's what's happening. So brown bread is often just colored white bread or white flour. So read your labels and see what's in the packet. If it doesn't contain wholemeal flour, then it's not going to do you as much good. Wholemeal flour is the key. It's the key thing that you need to look for when you're checking on bread, especially your brown bread. When it comes to maize, which is also known as corn, we've said that maize is something that it's really not such a big deal for us here in this country, but it's a big deal in other countries, particularly in America. Because in America, we have the issue with GMO, which we've already mentioned. You have to be very careful about the source of corn because of the extreme toxicity of GMO. And a lot of it is imported in animal feed, but we don't have to worry too much about that here. We've also looked at nuts and seeds. Again, very important and powerful healing foods. Test them and use them freely because they're very high in energy and often contain a lot of nutrients. We've said use organic every way you can. And with dairy, we're going to substitute things that are non-dairy. And you can also find very nice substitutes for yogurt, particularly in the soya world. There are good products that you can use that will help you to have more probiotic in your body. Yogurts can be very helpful, and even in the soy yogurts. There are all healing foods, healing for your gut, and that's what you need. So I think that gives you a picture of what you're going to do. The only thing you need to do is to make these changes and to make sure that the food you're eating is not harming you. It's as simple as that. You just test. Is it good? Is it not good? Yes, great, eat it. If it's not, park it. And maybe just for a few days. You will often notice within 5 days of stopping foods that are toxic and starting foods that are healing, significant shifts in your energy, how you feel, and your general sense of well-being. It's a bit like eating poison. You can't feel well when you're eating a poison. If you're going to eat toxic foods, it's the same things. You don't know it, but you're basically doing the same thing. When you stop eating them, you just feel different. Now there's one big key that I have mentioned in passing, and that's water. There's a whole series I have on water in this series. Water is a magical substance. Everything in your body exists in what's called an aqueous or watery environment. We're all floating in water. Over 60% of us is water. You have to drink enough water, and if you're not drinking enough water, you're dehydrated and you're going to have health challenges. Very, very important. How do you know if you're drinking enough water? It's very simple. Your urine should be straw-colored or clear, and if it's darker than that, you haven't drunk enough water. And do filter your water in whatever way you can, either with a charcoal filter or, better still, with a reverse osmosis filter, because there's a lot of toxicity in water, and if you're drinking a lot of water, obviously, you want to make sure that it's as clean and pure as possible. So that pretty well wraps up this section. We're going to move on in the next section, and we're going to talk about supplementation, because as I've pointed out, there are certain nutrients that you may be missing, and if you're missing them, things don't work very well. so deficiencies have to be dealt with if they're in your food. You may well be eating as well as you can, but there are probably minerals and other things missing, and without those, as I said earlier, the car doesn't start very well. And when you put them in, suddenly, bingo, everything starts to work. It's surprisingly how powerful they can be. So we'll talk about supplementation and how to figure out what you need in the next section.